You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christi Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. I cannot tell you what a joy it is. I think between David and Sissy, they are the most frequented guests on our podcast.
That's probably true.
So today we have David Thomas back with us again. He has written a brand new book called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. And we are his.
We're like super fans.
We're super fans
We're not like
of
fans.
David
We're like,
and
veers on creepy, but oh well.
You two, I am super fans of yours. That's the way this works. Let's be clear.
Well, we are honored to have you on. As always, any time with you is just amazing for us. And so I want to spend time today just talking about this book. I know so many listeners have boys and they're raising strong boys. They want to raise strong boys. This whole idea of emotionally strong, I think, is one that so many of us as families or as parents, as adults ourselves, maybe weren't raised with, or we didn't have an understanding of what it means to be emotionally strong. We talk about, at least I learned as a wrestler and a baseball player what it meant to, be tough and be physical and all those types of things. And I think I think it's a lot more comfortable, especially from a dad standpoint. So to be talking about emotionally strong boys is something I think is relatively new, and you are doing it in such a powerful way. But not only are you talking about it, you do this day in and day out with boys as a therapist at Daystar, and so that's what makes this even more special. Is this is your bread and butter. You love doing this, and you also have raised them. So, David, I would love for those of you who are listening to the podcast for the first time, just introduce yourself a bit. Tell us a little bit about your own family and what it is that you do. And then we'll jump in here and talk a little bit about raising emotionally strong boys.
I would love to. And I would first say that I am a proud son, husband, and father. I have been married to this amazing woman for the last 28 years. I wrote about in this new book what it's like to surround yourself with people who outpace you, and I'm consistently surrounded by people in my personal and professional life who outpace me that I think just make me better, I believe, in all the spaces. So grateful for my wife, and we have 3 young adult children. We're officially empty nesters now, which we're still adjusting to. It's such a strange transition to have done, as you all know, this thing day in and day out, every day for all these years, and then all of a sudden to not be doing that in the same way. And so it's a brand new season of parenting. And in addition to the kids I love and have parented, I get to be with kids every day in my work, as you kindly mentioned, and have been at this amazing place called Daystar for the last 25 years. I have been practicing here, which feels so strange to say. Yeah. Yes, I started when I was 6, so I was very young.
That's true.
Obviously.
Yeah.
No,
and then you got
clearly
married
old.
Right?
Yeah.
You got married when you were 3.
There it is. There it is. There it is. It explains so much.
Totally.
But love this work, love this team of people, and love the way we do the work. We are in a house rather than an office building, and we always laugh. The most sought-after therapists in our practice are 6 therapy dogs. So we're all in line behind these dogs in terms of kids' favorites. And, in fact, I have a therapy dog who, when he got his certification, when he completed the program, they hand you this graduation certificate. And I looked at it and realized, my dog has more letters behind his name than I do. It's so humbling to have a dog who's more credentialed than you are. So I'm outpaced by all the humans and canines I'm in close proximity to.
Yeah, your dog is such an overachiever. I love it.
He is. He's so credentialed. Clearly, I work for him and not him for me. He makes that clear on a daily basis.
we got Copper, our golden doodle, and we're like, I think he can do therapy work. He's such a sweet puppy. He cannot. Not even close. Like, the amount of energy he brings into a room, it's too much. It's too much.
We take him out in the boat with us, and his anxiety levels, he needs therapy. He actually needs therapy because
He needs to go see you and your therapy dog.
as soon as someone jumps in the water off the boat, man, he's losing his mind. He doesn't
Like,
know
they're
what.
drowning. They're drowning. Anyway. Yeah, we don't have one of those, but I'd love
We're
one.
all called to different work.
We are.
Oh, I love
That's
it.
true. That's true.
Well, thank you. And tell us a little bit about your kids. I know they're raised now, but you talk about, especially your boys in the book, just creating a space. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit, but tell us a little bit about them as well, and just your own journey of being a dad.
I would love to. I have a friend and mentor who I know you all know, Dr. Dan Allender, who wrote a book many years ago called How Children Raise Parents, which is one of my all-time favorite parenting books that's ever been written. And I think there is so much wisdom even to the title of that book. And so I would say, as much as I hope I have been a part of raising these three great humans that I love in this world, they have certainly been raising me and have been the greatest vehicle, I think, for my transformation and my sanctification throughout my life, and still are. The thing that all of us know, but I'm living in a brand new way right now, is that you don't really ever stop being a parent. You just do it differently in different seasons. And I would honestly say I am learning as much about entrusting my kids to God in this season of, just releasing them out into the world and not being a part of their daily lives and watching them find their way to the work that God's called them to, in as an important a way, I think, as any season of parenting. And we all know that parenting is this long journey of releasing these kids we love into the world and training and releasing them. But, I'm in a brand new season of doing that and figuring out what that looks like, and excited to learn, just as all three of us know that, there's just new things that every season of parenting is going to bring to us, new ways of being transformed and sanctified and changed and grown, all those things. And so I dedicated this book to the three of them, and said in my words to them in the dedication and the acknowledgement, like, I really do hope to grow up to be as remarkable a human being as they are. Like, I'm astounded by these three people. And clearly, as I said, I'm married way out of my league. So that had a lot to do with it. They have a rock star mother who they spent much of their life with, obviously. But it's been so fun to watch who they've become. And one of the things that I talk about in the book, there's a whole chapter on mentors and models. And I am in a season where I think I'm just reflecting on all the adults who've had a voice in my kids' life also, that have imprinted them, that has deeply affected who they are. And on occasion, I'll run into one of their old teachers or coaches, and it brings me to tears. Like, I could cry talking about it right now, just thinking about these adults who invested in my kids' lives in really vulnerable moments, in middle school and high school, these important seasons of their lives that, it's so fun to get to reflect to them the fruit of where they are in their journey now as college students, and just, ministering to other people around them in so many remarkable different ways. So it's just really fun to get to sit and watch that whole process play out. And then when they come home, it's so fun just to be in the same space with them and listen and learn as I am.
I love just hearing the way that you, first of all, love them and you feel it come through. And I think so often, and might be people listening going, yeah, well, he's on the other side of it. We're in the trenches right now. We're in the middle of it. But you also, you primarily, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you primarily, most of your professional life has been working with boys ages around 7 to 10. Is that right? In that age range. And
It's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've done a lot of focused work. You are correct, with boys in that space. And I've done a lot of work with adolescent boys as well.
Yeah.
And As we know, they're fascinating creatures.
Fascinating creature. And so I want to send some encouragement, because I think that's what you, even the way you have encouraged us personally in our own journey with our son, with our firstborn. Now we have another one who's 2, so we have another one coming along.
We'll be back through.
We'll be back through for some more encouragement from you. But I think, just encouraging those parents with boys, and I think I'm getting to the question of why this book. What is it about coming alongside families and parents of boys is it that brings you alive? What is it that brings you alive in that?
What a great question. I would say first off that I wrote a book on boy development years ago called Wild Things, and it felt so important to me then, still feels important to me now, to talk about things that are really normal about boys in different stages of development that don't seem all that normal. And I sit with a lot of moms who grew up with only sisters, and, and as we'd all agree, like, they're fascinating, peculiar creatures if you didn't live in close proximity to them the bulk of your life. And so I really did want to talk about some things that are normal in ways that I hope would really encourage, moms who didn't grow up with brothers, teachers who, had not had a lot of experience growing up with boys either, and found themselves in these classroom settings full of these fascinating creatures. And that is something that has been deeply encouraging, to have people come up to me at, different points following classes or having read the book and just say, like, I can't tell you how freed up I felt after reading about him in this stage of development, and just realizing this is normal. Like, that's exactly what he should be doing, and things that I hope would make sense in terms of the long journey of development. One of the things I talk so much about that you all know is that, most every developmental theorist would agree that adolescence ends for a girl somewhere around 19 to 20, but for boys somewhere between 22 and 25. Wow. And so we've got to lengthen the timeline of development for boys, or else what will happen is, we'll launch boys at 18 out into the world and say, go be a grown-up, and he could have a good 7 years left of adolescence to finish out his development. So I think when we know something like that, it allows us to think intentionally, strategically with him in the summers of his college years about how he can engage meaningful experiences like internships and practicums and missions experiences that allow him to continue that growth in a way that is just vital to his timeline. And so I just love talking about those things. And then I would say with this newest book, having done this work for as long as I have, I don't love reflecting on this, but it's important to do. This many years into it, I've lost count with the number of families that I've intersected with who are navigating the process of separation and divorce, and how commonly I sit with families in that moment, and I will hear, some kind of story about a dad who had an affair, a dad who found himself in the throes of addiction, and that's certainly not every time I'm hearing that, but it is to say a lot of the time I am, and that's reflected in the statistics. We know men lead the stats for things like infidelity and internet pornography, addiction, substance abuse, suicide, all these really scary places that men are finding themselves in, that the common denominator with each of those is it's a man's attempt to try to numb out or shut down or stop feeling in some way. And so you see that long enough and sit front row to the realities and the residual and the wreckage of that on families, and is so much where a lot of the passion for this particular book was birthed. And, I think about that Frederick Douglass quote that I love so much, we can build strong children, or we can repair broken men. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I thought, I want to be about that. Everything I know to do on my watch that is about the work of building strong boys that don't have to live into those chapters in their stories in the same way. And so I end the book with that famous quote by Desmond Tutu, that at some point we've got to stop just pulling people out of the river, and let's go downstream and find out why they're falling in. And so I very much believe, back to that common denominator, the harder boys work to try and shut those things down. And then the more culturally I think we enforce that, the more familiar that becomes. And of course, men would find themselves in those places. And I was even thinking, Josh, when you were talking on the front side about your experience with sports, I was with a dad last week who is a husband and a father and plays professional baseball. And he said, David, my whole life I grew up around men who were speaking the messages of don't feel and don't ask for help to me. And then when I got into my career in baseball, the deeper I got into it, they even train us how to look stoic in the game. Like you don't want your opponent to know you're wrestling with in any way when you're standing on the plate or in the field. And so he was like, I've spent my whole life being trained in that direction, and I cannot tell you how difficult it has made my life as a husband and a father, and how much unlearning I'm having to do and relearning. And so I honestly believe that's the message that most adult men got growing up, some version of don't feel, don't ask for help. And that explains those scary statistics. And so I'm just excited to think about contributing to the conversation in some way, a different way that we can raise boys and different messages we can send to them. How we could be done with, the classic message of man up. If we think about it, that's full of those two things. Man up on some level means don't feel, don't need anything. Do everything on your own. And so I just really want us to dissect all of what we're communicating to boys throughout their growth and development that simply is not serving them well, and some different things we could do to raise emotionally strong boys.
Man,
it's like,
this is why we love you, because we do the famous at home stuff. We reach a lot of parents, that type of thing. But at least for me, I speak for myself. My heart is our kids' generation and our kids, because we see the lack of emotional intelligence in leaders in our culture. And when you see it in leaders, and you see it from people who are put in positions of celebrity status and influencer status, or on television or the like, and that becomes the model or the role model, or what it is to, it's like, no, I think we need to change what it looks like for emotionally healthy leadership. And you've got to start early if we're going to do that. And so our hearts are so aligned. When I think of raising boys, I often think of King David. And, because it's so funny. I mean, you read the book of Psalms and you see a guy who kills a bear on one hand, and yet a guy who's drowning his bed or his couch all night long with tears, and it's like,
Yes.
and lamenting and feeling and crying out for help. And it's like, to me, that encompasses the entirety of a man, to see that whole spectrum of, and so what does it look like to raise our boys into that? What does it look like to be able to journey alongside them and do that in a way that is healthy? And I just, those were the thoughts that were going through my brain as you were talking. I thought of King David specifically.
and I'd love to ask David, just for those that are, this is it sounds great, but it's so new. What do you, when you say emotionally strong boys, what does that mean?
Good.
It's a great question. Right out of the gate, I talk about what I call the 3 R's, which are recognize, regulate, and repair. And those are really the nuts and bolts of what I think it means to be emotionally strong. And recognize simply being, just paying attention to the signs and signals that our body gives us when we're having an emotional response. I, in the workbook, talk with boys, about it kind of like the dashboard on a car. And how our car will signal us when one of our tires is low and needs air, or when the oil needs changing, or wiper fluid needs increasing. And if we pay attention to those signs and signals, the car keeps running efficiently, effectively. If we don't, eventually the car's going to stop running, and we could do some real damage to the engine if we're not attending to those signs and signals we're getting. So that's kind of the first R. And then the second R is just developing some coping skills that allow us to kind of calm the nervous system when it goes into that heightened state of arousal. And it fascinates me. I talk in the book about coming up with what I call a top 5 list of just the top 5 things you could do in moments when you feel dysregulated. And, You all, I was recently in the airport on that particular Saturday. I was trying to fly from Nashville to Orlando to speak. That you all remember our country set a record number of flight delays and cancellations. And so I was trapped in the Nashville airport trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. And I have never seen so many dysregulated adults in one space in my life. I watched two professional men in suits get handcuffed and carried out of the airport for becoming aggressive with gate agents, like screaming and yelling and becoming volatile. And the airport was full of kids who were watching all of this happen. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I wish I could just hold a seminar right here in the Nashville airport, and we could all work on our top 5 lists, and we could take some laps around the airport and do some deep breathing and go get a cold water, like all these things. I think it's just fascinating how many grownups in this world don't have healthy coping skills. They can't do that second R. And so I really was ready to start teaching. I was looking for a microphone in the Nashville airport. I couldn't find one, but that's yes, I wanted to so bad, but that's the second R. And then the third R is repair. And it is taking ownership and doing any needed relational work if I struggle to recognize and regulate. And I talk a lot about how in my experience and work, I think boys do a lot of swinging between blame and shame. And they have trouble getting to that healthy middle space of ownership.
And I credit that to you all the time.
Yes,
It is
I
so
see it all the
helpful.
time. Well,
And it's so helpful with adult men. Like, if you watch it, and it's been one of the most profound insights for me as a woman to see, like, that's just the way they bend, is like,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
no idea, not a clue, can't
Yes.
relate. But it's so helpful to understand, like, oh, that's what it is, like, and then to have compassion for it, as opposed to like just like total not understanding.
Yes. And that developing that third R, developing any of the R's, is a learned skill. And the good news is it turns out you can teach an old dog new tricks. I'm living proof of that. I'm evidence of that right now. And that every one of us can learn skills, even if things have been habitual and common and familiar for us for long periods of time. Like, we know as we study the architecture of the brain, we can develop new neural pathways. And so it excites me to think about framing it in that way with parents. I talk about teaching these skills no different than we teach kids to ride a bike or swim in the deep end of the pool or shoot hoops, any number of things that we all know that's not something I get down after one attempt. Like, I have to practice that over and over. I often say to parents, think about how many summers you took swimming lessons, and then think about how many hours you've spent swimming in a pool. It's not a one-time thing. So we're going to have to practice those 3 R's over and over, and then over time they can become more instinctive, but they certainly won't without good practice.
And I think so often, and we as parents, and I see this with Christi, actually, I'm going to call you out, so we'll just...
Not sure which way this is going to go.
And I don't know, but I don't know if it's a mom, because I'm going to do my not so maybe healthy part of this, but our tendency, and I think I'm speaking to a lot of people here, as a mom, I think Christi's tendency is to, and I want to tie into the blame shame thing again a little bit for those listening, because just for those who understand that a little deeper, I think we kind of cut that short just a little bit for those who might not understand. I'd love to clarify that. But for me, I think what ends up happening is with our son, we tend to think that that if we tell our kids one time to do something, that the next time it's like, well, why didn't you do it? I just got done telling you. And I see that. I'm just saying that. I love you, baby. It's like, I just told you to do that. But we expect, and I'm going back to the swimming analogy, and I'm the same way. It's like, are you kidding me? I just said this to you. But yet, I think there's, I would love for you, because my tendency is to go to Christi, he's just being a boy. He's just a boy. Like, that's a boy thing to do right there. Like, don't be so hard on him. That's a boy thing to do. And I think that's what you do so well, is you give us a framework for going, yes, he's just a boy. However, in being a boy, here's a way for him to level up. And I think that's what's helpful that you have done. And so anyway, I don't even know what question I'm asking there other than to speak into how it's playing out in our life. So a lot of times when we have you on, you're actually counseling us.
Right.
And
And we
so
just hit record so everyone else
everyone
can
else can see
benefit.
it.
Yeah.
But but
You
I think
too.
that's what I just love for you to speak to that, because I think that's probably a dynamic that if we're dealing with it,
Mhm.
other people are dealing with it too.
Yes, I agree. And I love even the way you phrase that, because I think it is both and. Like, let's acknowledge this is what's true about him. For example, he has a lot of energy. He has a lot of, I talk in the book, boys have a lot of physicality to their emotions. So it's why research would tell us toddler age boys are more prone to biting, hitting, kicking, screaming in a classroom. It's why adolescent boys are a little more prone to punching holes in drywall. And so there's this need for release, this intensity, this energy inside of him that we've got to help him with that second R create some movement-based strategy so he can release some of that physicality. So we're going to acknowledge that's true and help him skill up in that space. So it's not just, well, he can't help it. He's just more physical. He is, and let's help him develop more in those spaces. But again, if we're not training him in the direction of something different, we are all creatures of habit. We are simply going to fall back on what's most familiar to every one of us. So it really is about skill building.
And I love that. And I just want to encourage those of you listening. We put it in the show notes. Please, please, please go get a copy of Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. I think that
Can I just say, though, I think it's the subtitle that tools your son can build on for life. And I think that's what it is. It's like tools for life. And you realize that's what you're equipping them with. And I literally just got this back because a friend texted me. They were going, she was like, do you have David's new book? And I was like, I do. She's like, could you please bring it to my house? They were leaving on a road trip. And I was like, I will bring it. Like, they're like ready to like peel out the driveway. And I like race up with the book and I'm like, here, so she can take it. And then I texted her because I was like, we need it back for today. So she like drops it out. She's like, I'm racing it back. She drops it off on the front porch. It's a very hot commodity around here. I just want you to know. But I mean it because
You're so kind.
I'm not lying. It's 100% true. Is it not
true. It's all true.
Because every word of that is true. So like we realize how much we need this. I think especially as moms. Maybe dads are more intuitive with boys. But I think, like, that's why Wild Things were so profound to me. And I haven't read through all of this. And I want to show this, too, because I know we were talking about, if you're watching, if you're listening to the podcast, you can't see it. But we'll put it in the show notes. It's Strong and Smart. And that's the workbook that is for you to go through with your son. Is that right, David? Like,
Yes, you are correct. You're 100% correct.
The thing that I was going to say, the reason I was saying this, and you went to the subtitle, which is fantastic, tools your son can build on for life. I think so often when we get in this dynamic of he's just a boy, oh no, he coming down hard on him. I think as parents, it's easy to go, I just don't have time. I don't have the energy. Like, how do I coach him? How do I do skill building with him? And the beauty about what you do is you actually give tools.
Yeah.
You actually give practical stuff that gives parents encouragement to know that they can actually do this and implement skill building. It just takes intentionality is really what it takes. But it doesn't take a lot of hard work. It just requires intentionality. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're already being intentional. So we already know you're winning, you know?
Well, I want to say too, that means a lot to me that you said that, because as a parent myself and as a professional, I know what it feels like to read a book and agree with the ideas like, yes, I love this. I agree with that. And then say, and I have no idea what to do with that or how to do that. And it feels so important to me with all of our content that it be user-friendly. And so every chapter ends with what I call 5 intentional practices. And so I'm going to take what we've been discussing in the chapter and I'm going to put feet to it, like 5 things you could do tonight. Feet on the ground. And so that is of great importance to me, and a part of even why the workbook felt so important as well, because I want to even think about, all right, what do these concepts look like with a boy in the 6 to 12 space, and how could we turn this into what I call some experiments? Boys tend to like experiments, so let's do some experiments together that are going to help hopefully make some strong connections around the ideas and the content. So You all are kind. It means a lot for you to say that. That feels of great
No,
importance
it's
to
so
me.
good. Can you talk, can we go back and can
Can
you talk a little bit about that blame shame continuum, that tightrope of blame and shame in boys, I think ultimately into men,
I'd
because
love
I
to.
think it does go in, as you said, the professional gentleman who got taken out in handcuffs. I mean, we can easily, I mean, we laugh at it in some respects, but in other respects you go, man, we don't have the coping skills, or we are stunted emotionally at certain levels of
Right,
at certain places in our lives, where we are functioning as a 50-year
right.
old man, but emotionally as a 15-year-old boy or teenager. Talk a little bit about that blame shame tightrope, if you would.
I will. And, I'd invite parents listening to think about as we talk around these ideas how often we're hearing these declarations, and it's so familiar sometimes with boys. We stop really even noticing it or paying close attention because it becomes so familiar. So I hear these statements all the time in my office from parents of boys, like he's saying, it's her fault about his sister. My teacher didn't teach it the right way. My coach is just not giving me enough playing time. Like statements that involve pointing the finger at some other person in his life is the blame part of the swing. And then can swing straight to the other extreme and go to shame and these statements that are full of self-contempt. I'm such an idiot. No one in this family loves me. Everyone thinks that I shouldn't have been born. I'm the worst player on the team. I'm the dumbest kid in my class. I'm the slowest reading. These statements that are just full of shame and self-contempt. And again, unless we're teaching that healthy middle ground of ownership, boys will just swing back and forth between those places. So I talk about how, we can draw out that continuum on a piece of paper with boys. We can just write those three words at the top of a piece of paper: blame, ownership, and shame, and then start to help him fill in underneath each column when he's saying those things and not even aware he is at times. Now, this is not an exercise or an experiment we're going to do with him in the moment when he's in that heightened state, but this is going to be with some distance. And we can even give him back some of his words. Hey, buddy, when we were talking, I heard you say it's all her fault. Where would that statement fit? And then I heard you saying, I'm worthless. I'm the biggest idiot. No one loves me. Those sorts of things. And then getting to an ownership statement, helping boys figure out what would that look like. So ownership's going to look different depending on the situation or circumstance. But I give examples of, boys who are like, my teacher didn't teach it the right way. Blame. I'm such an idiot, or I'm the dumbest kid in my class. Shame. Ownership could be, you know what? I didn't study as hard as I could have, but I get another chance to take a test on Friday. So it could look a lot of different ways. Instead of my coach doesn't give me enough playing time or I'm the worst member of the team, it could be I didn't practice as hard in my off time, and I remember our coach saying he wanted us to put in 30 minutes a day. Whatever it may be, ownership's going to look different, unique to the circumstance, but helping boys get to that place is so important. And I will simply laugh and say, I think it's so instinctive that it fascinates me how early it shows up. In fact, I have a vivid memory of one of my twin boys when he was 5 years old. On a Saturday morning, we were running around the house trying to get out the door to a soccer game, and he couldn't find his cleats, walked straight up to my wife and said, "What did you do with my soccer cleats?" Like it never occurred to him to say, have you seen them? Do you know where they are? Do you know where I left them? Which would have been ownership. Absolutely. But it was to my, what did you do with them? As if my wife had worn them last night with her black dress, So it fascinates me how knee-jerk a reaction that is, to the point that it never occurred to him to even say, have you seen them? Do you know where they are? Do you know where I left them? But what did you do
Yeah.
with them? And so I think it is so ingrained in boys that unless we're doing some of this developing in this space, he'll just keep swinging back and forth and back and forth. And then
Right.
if he lives long enough in the shame space, in mid-adolescence, that's where it can get really dangerous. Boys are in an identity formation stage of their development then, and if I'm speaking that kind of statement out loud over myself over and over and believing that to be the most true thing about me, I'm worthless, I'm an idiot, I'm unloved, a boy can do some real damage to his sense of self in that space. So all the more why I want to be interrupting these
Wow,
patterns.
it's so good. This happened just last night, and our son had he wrote he likes to write songs, and he wrote his first worship song, and he had it in his pocket. He hadn't yet played it for us, but he was so excited about it. And we just didn't get time the other day. We had friends in town. We didn't get time to listen to it. He didn't get a chance to play it for us. And so last night, he's just in tears coming downstairs. And it was funny because I can't remember exactly how it played out, but I think it was Mom washed my worship song, so I don't have it anymore, you know? And so Mom washed it, right? So Mom washed
Here
it.
it is.
But then I said to him, I said, "Well, what do you mean she washed it?" And he's like, and then the tears really started to come because he said, "I had it in my pocket and I forgot to take it out." And then the shame came, and it literally
Yes.
went from blame to shame, and he was just beating himself up and beating himself up.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, buddy," I was like, "Did you think through, like, how do you know that it was washed? Did you look in your shorts pockets?" "Well, Mom found some paper scraps in the laundry." I said, "Okay, can you get it?" And so my thing with him is a lot of times is, let's come up with solutions rather than problems, because when he's in shame, he's constantly looking at the problem and not looking at solutions. It's all about the problem, all about
Yes.
the problem, all about the problem. And so I just walked upstairs with him. He found some remnants of it, and I came downstairs and I was able to salvage enough of it that
What a dad.
he went into the room
I
and
didn't even know you did that.
he rewrote the song, and he remembered the lyrics, and
Wow.
the ones that weren't there, he was able to remember them, and he was just like completely over the moon. And I asked him afterwards, I said, "Buddy, what did you learn? What lessons did you learn?" And he just said that I need to start looking for solutions. And I was like, "Okay." I did it last night with solutions and problems, but I love the way that you use this from the standpoint of ownership, like giving ownership, and not. So I'm going to use
Yes.
that framework. I need to use that framework more often, because I think it's just really helpful, because it's so fascinating how he beats himself up. It really is. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
see it play out right in front of you.
But I think even just to give kids those tools, I've noticed with our son, I could say sons, but really the other ones too. We haven't. We're just trying to avoid,
We're getting into the terrible twos. We're
Yeah,
starting.
we're
Getting there. He's starting to assert himself.
the bite. He's not biting, but like Anyway, we're back in those days. But with our other one, the more tools that we've given him, it's shocking to see how quickly it makes him feel competent in a social situation. Like some of the stuff from, we've
Yes.
talked about with you before, of just boys are unaware a lot of times, which is why I love these 3 R's, because you realize they're just not recognizing even their own emotions or reading a room, like how to do this in social, and they need practice to do it. And that was all so helpful and encouraging to me
Yes.
as a mom, to realize, like, at least our daughter, she just intuitively gets social situations, things, relationships. He doesn't. He literally needs to be coached on some things, and then he gets it, and then he feels confident going into, meeting a grown up or whatever different social situations. And it's just been so helpful, David, to give him these tools that I realize he gets it, he understands, and then he feels this true sense of competency. Like, I know what I'm doing in this situation. Like, not that he always will. I mean, we're just going to encounter new situation after new situation. But there's a framework, like even the blame, shame, like to give them a framework where it's like, that makes me make sense. And I think we underestimate how much
Yes.
understanding helps our kids. Like, they're so smart, but when they feel crazy
Yes.
or out of control, that's scary. And yet we can give them these tools that make them feel
Yes.
like, oh, that makes sense. Like, there's boxes to put it in. And I think that brings the whole family's anxiety levels down, because it's like, okay, what we're seeing makes sense, and what they're feeling
Yes.
also makes sense.
Yes. Well, and something else I loved about the two of you telling that story is, I love when you talked about engaging solutions. And I talk about in the book that, we as males are action-oriented creatures. Like, we're good problem solvers. And so I want to activate that strength with boys as we think about developing these skills. That's the thing that I think is so in line with one of the ways that boys are designed, how they're hardwired, that I think we can activate in this process. Like, brainstorm away with him. What do you think would work? What do you want to try? Those kinds of questions that I think activate that action-oriented creature in a way that I think speaks
I
to
love
his
that.
design.
I love that. I do. It is fascinating though how when they're in that shame cycle, how that problem solving part of the brain just completely shuts down. Like it's just this woe is me. And so you have to
Yes.
be intentional about asking those questions. Well, how can we do this? And sometimes I have to actually coach him out of his self-pity in order to get him problem solving, to trigger that
Yes.
problem solving. And so,
Yes.
yeah, I just think, yeah,
Well,
no, go ahead.
I agree with you. And it's why I labor so long talking about that second R that, in the workbook, I even do this little Brain 101 section with boys because I want them to grow up understanding the way our brains and bodies work. And that, as you wisely said, like if I'm amped up, if most of the blood flow in my brain has moved to the amygdala at that point, I can't think rationally and manage my emotions. And if I can't do those two significant things, I'm going to really struggle doing the healthy work of moving toward ownership. Otherwise, I'm just going to swing back and forth if my amygdala is flying the plane. And so it's part of why I wanted to even make that part of the work simple in ways that kids could start to understand. And so I love everything you're saying right there. It just feels like such a picture of, I just always feel so like-minded, like-hearted with the two of you. And on that note, may I say something else now?
I'm sure.
So one of the things I talk about in the book, thank you, is how somewhere around 9 to 10, a boy's brain will begin to channel all primary emotions, fear, sadness, disappointment, confusion, into anger. And culturally, I think we support that biological process. Like we send a lot of messages to boys and males, like it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to be sad or afraid. And I talk so much about the importance of helping boys work through the anger and get to what's underneath that. And I have two dear friends that I love that wrote a new book that I want every person listening to stop, pause right now, and drop in your Amazon basket, called What Do I Do with Anger? You two, you've no idea how grateful I am you wrote that book. And, I've told you, I have had a copy of What Am I Feeling out on my coffee table in my office for every parent who walks in these doors to see consistently. And now that book will be sitting side by side with that.
Thank
So
you.
I'm so grateful you all did that. Oh, it's so needed. It is so needed.
It's so needed, and
Thank you.
It's like hard. I remember thinking like, no one's gonna want to buy a book about anger. Like we were wrestling, like, what do you even put on the cover? Because it's threatening, it's scary. Like people want to avoid it, but that's just why it's so needed. And I think I love what you said. Well, first of all, I did not know that's what happens at age 10, but guess who turns 10 next month? So goody. Can't wait.
Goody for him. He's got two parents who wrote a great book about
Actually, I'm not joking. We had just got a book, like the box of books, the first box of books. The kids had not read it. They had helped with some of it actually, but not, the completed thing. And so we started to read it together, and I wish I could remember exactly what happened. I think little brother Micah comes in and took like his Legos, like destroyed something, like, it went downhill quick. And Landon's like, Mom, I'm like so mad at him. And I was like, that's funny. We got a book about that. And he thought it was like the funniest thing. I was like, I got a really good book for that. And anyway, he laughs at all my jokes right now. So I think we're still in the lover stage because he just thinks I'm the funniest thing. And it makes me love him even more. And I hope that never changes because he laughs at all my jokes. But it's real. It's just a very real emotion. And it's not just for kids. It's for adults too. Yes. Like, genuinely, I think it's, even the process of talking about it has helped me be more aware of what is, because, we cover up our anger. We turn it inside, like, keep it inside. We turn it inward. And as adults thinking that that's a better way to handle it. And it's not. But we don't know what to do with it because now, I think more for women, like you're saying, for boys, it is a little more culturally acceptable, whereas sadness and fear are not. And I think it's a really great just awareness to have. Like, what messages are we sending to our boys? Like, you big, strong, tough
Yes.
guy, as opposed to like, get tougher, like toughen up. You're sensitive. You're
Yes.
too, afraid.
Oh,
And do you?
Christy, you know what I'm thinking
Tell
as
me
you're telling
everything.
that story? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, I couldn't agree more with you about how it's useful for adults. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm going to start flying with that book. The next time I'm in the airport, I'm going to whip that thing out. Those of you who've flown through Nashville know we have live musicians performing in the airport. I'm going to get on one of those stage and host Story Hour. That's what I'm going to start doing with all these flight delays and
Fantastic
cancellations. You'll find me reading. Yep, you'll find me reading What Do I Do with Anger at the Nashville airport if you need me.
It's so good.
I think we don't realize like how much our society is run off of unhealthy, emotionally unregulated people. And in some ways it's celebrated.
Yes.
And they make money off it. Like, they make money off people who can't control themselves and fly off the handle, because we're looking for a quick fix, and we'll pay money to just make it feel better quick. But this work, like doing this work, and truly, I'm so excited, David, to do this with Landon, our oldest. Like, and I see it's for 6 to 12.
And he's excited about it. That's the cool part. He got it in the we got it in the mail, and he
Yeah.
took it, and he's
Right.
excited about it.
Yeah.
So
But to give, like, even invest that time with him, like, I'm really excited. And to, like we're saying, just to give him those tools. But I think we don't recognize down the line of time, and I pray decades from now, we'll be in your shoes in a decade, and see, like, it was so worth the investment, because not to say our sons will be better than, but they're just going to be so much. They're full of character. They'll be grounded, I pray. They'll be emotionally strong. And I don't think we have any idea how the ripple effects of that will transform lives generationally.
Agreed.
Because the converse is like you see, and like we see. I mean, that's why Leader's Heart came to be, was these adults who are leading great big things, super competent, amazingly talented, and yet there's things that we missed growing up, and so we don't know how to handle the magnitude of the responsibilities we've been given, because we didn't have some of these tools. And not to shame anybody,
Yes.
it's just, I don't even think our parents were aware, but we are. And I think we're raising kids in a different generation where we have people like you to teach us how to raise kids in a different way, so they don't, we pray, run into these hangups and the hooks of culture. And I'm just so grateful for you, truly.
yeah.
Wow. So grateful for you all, and just thinking about the meaningful work, the life-giving, meaningful work that the two of you are doing in this world, and that we're really doing the exact same work in different spaces on different ends of the developmental timeline, and the exact same place in some moments too. And just how important, I couldn't agree with you more, just how important the work feels for, and that I get excited with you, Christi. I hate that it took a global pandemic for us to put the focus on mental health in the way we have. I'm thankful. That's one of the good things that came out of an incredibly difficult and painful season for our world. And my great hope is we think about things we want to carry forward on the other side of the pandemic. That's one of the things I hope doesn't change again, that we're never not thinking about that. I hate that it took the statistics being what they are, the rise in anxiety and depression and suicide being what they are, for us to get that focus. But I hope we don't lose that focus again, because I think it could change so much in our world. I really do. And it excites me with you. Like, I get super excited to think about a generation of boys growing into adult men who have these skills in place, and they get to watch them as husbands and fathers. And you all, just to come full circle in it all, talking about my work on the front side, having done this for 25 years, one of the gifts of having done it for that long is that I now do, this just happened last week again, I now do parent consultations with couples who, I knew the dad when he was in 6th grade. Like, I counseled him. It happened a couple of weeks ago. And to see these men who I knew as young men and to know their stories and to know a lot of heartache in their stories, and that they, to our conversation, had a space to process those events and develop an emotional vocabulary and develop the 3 R's in ways that it is beautiful to watch them as fathers now. Like, it's so much fun. I mean, I was sitting with one young man, and he was raised by a remarkable single mom, and his dad was really not invested in any way with his life. And I was sitting in the room with him, and he was talking about his 2nd grade son, and I could not stop weeping. I just couldn't stop weeping because I couldn't stop thinking about him, himself when he was, young, and all of what I knew to be true about his story, and how much redemption I was getting to sit front row and watch at this point. So that just excites me with you all to think about what it's going to look like on a generation of men.
I'd be a mess.
I was a mess.
That's
So good.
It's beautiful to
I
watch.
want to bring this full circle as we close. For those of you, it'll be in the show notes. Make sure you obviously get Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. Also, we're going to put this in the show notes as well. Go on Instagram and follow Raising Boys and Girls, because David and Sissy and their team are on there constantly posting great stuff, and even things that pertain to where we're at and where we find ourselves right now with where children are at mentally and emotionally because of the pandemic. And they just give really practical tools on social media there to be able to journey alongside your kids. So make sure that you are following them on Instagram. We'll put that also in the show notes. If you're watching here on YouTube, we'll have the ability to be able to click on that link. We're still new to YouTube, so it's probably here, or down here somewhere. Anyway, we don't know what we're doing. But I want to close out, David, bringing this thing full circle. You end every single chapter with kind of 5 practical takeaways. I would love for you in the season we're in, and thinking about those listening to the podcast, it doesn't have to be 5, but leave the parents with a couple practical takeaways for how they can be, until they get the book at their doorstep, how they can be investing in their boys right now.
I would say 2 things that I think any parent could do this very minute and keep doing easily, that you are not going to need any props for, you are not going to need to read any more books for, but you could just be implementing in the daily rhythms of your family, would be folding in more emotional vocabulary when you're just sitting around the table reporting on your day. When your spouse says, "How was your day?" Don't say fine. Say, "You know what? I felt embarrassed today. I had to give a presentation to the board of directors, and I didn't feel as prepared as I wanted to. I felt sad. I said something to a colleague, and I think I hurt their feelings, and I didn't mean to." Let the kids we love sit front row to the grown-ups they trust the most, using that kind of vocabulary, knowing that it's landing on them. And then the second thing I would say, so let's call that name your emotions. The second thing I would say is narrate. Narrate all throughout the day when you are engaging regulation strategy. So if you're stuck in traffic and worried you're about to be late on the way to church, say, "You know what? I feel tense inside my body. My back feels tight right now. I'm worried we're going to be late. There's more traffic than I thought. At the next red light, I'm going to do a minute of deep breathing." Or, "I'm going to turn on some worship music right now and let that kind of wash over me at this point." I wish kids could hear their parents talking about the work of regulation in the everyday, so they could see how normal that is, how not complicated that is. But the work of that, even when I shared the airport strategy, I wish there'd been parents saying, "You know what? I feel worried. We might not make our flight. Let's try going to buy a bottle of cold water in the gift shop. Let's try walking 2 laps around the airport at this moment and see how different we feel in our body." Like, just narrate those experiences so that kids get to see the naming and the navigating happening in real time, again, with the grown-ups they trust the most.
So good. So the first one, we have a whole chapter of that in Famous at Home. So if you need some tips on how to use emotion language in your home. There's a book for that as well. It's called Famous at Home. But the second one, I have never thought to do that in my, like, ever. But that is brilliant.
I just honk the horn at
Josh
the people
just, like,
that are in my
flips
way,
the bird,
like,
you know. Actually, the other day, I don't know.
A little
Do you-
screaming
this
happens.
is a random question. Do you guys ever use tapping with kids? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway, I was doing this the other day, and the kid, Kenny's like, "What's going on, Mom? You good?" And I was like, "Just trying to calm myself down." But I don't know that I thought to explain it to her.
Good for you.
Why that, like, even why that helps me, or that she could use that for her. So thank you. That is so helpful. And even grounding is one, like, to go outside, because we find, probably similar to you, like, we're in the house, we're working, or we're doing school or whatever. Like, I get sometimes, you know, you start to feel that recognize, right? The whole body is getting elevated. And so to just go outside, feet in the grass, be in the sunshine, like, it helps significantly. And so I have never thought to really tell them that's why I'm doing it, though. So that's genius. Love it.
Wow. I hope it feels helpful. I just could not be more grateful for the two of you and giving me the opportunity to come on and talk about this, and mostly giving me the opportunity just to hang out with you both, because I'm just bananas about the two of you. And if I were to give a third idea, it would be order What Do I Do with Anger right now. I mean that. Go order right now. That's your third instruction.
We were joking at the beginning of the episode before I think we even got on live that we
sell more of David's books
than we do our own.
Yeah.
And he was saying,
I sell more of yours.
Well, we love you, David.
That's friendship, right?
Yes,
like, that's real friendship.
Yeah. And it's kingdom building.
Yep.
You know,
y'all are the best.
Really are.
So
check out the show notes. Go get Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. David.
And Strong and Smart, the workbook.
And Strong and Smart, the workbook.
That's what I'm pumped to do that with our son as well.
We love you.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work.
Love you guys.
And until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet that you will walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home.